I'm Lisa Jepsen, CEO of Garson & Shaw. I'm pleased to launch our latest report, which examines the role of Guatemala's secondhand clothing industry and its trading relationship with the United States, which is Guatemala's largest supplier of secondhand clothing. Despite the scale of the trade, relatively little have been researched and written about it to date. At Garson & Shaw, we felt it was important to commission this research to gain a clear understanding of how the trade operates, address the misconceptions around textile waste, and highlight the broader positive socio-economic impact of this market. These insights come at a crucial time as public policy around textile evolves, both here in the US and internationally. A key focus is extended producer responsibility schemes. These are schemes where producers are held accountable for the full life cycle of their products, typically through a fee mechanism that can help fund collection, sorting, reuse, and recycling systems. I'm pleased to be joined by Jennifer Wang of Full Cycle Resource, who led the research and will discuss the report's key findings and what they mean for the second-hand clothing trade. Welcome, Jennifer, and thank you for joining me today. To start, can you please introduce yourself and your research interests?
Thank you, Lisa, for this opportunity to be here. Greeting from Nairobi, Kenya. For over a decade, I have been working in the Global South, scaling and working with various social enterprises, NGOs, businesses to address access to drinking water, reducing open defecation, scaling waste management collection, waste recovery, and recycling solution in both urban and rural settings. For the past 6 years, I focused my career specifically in waste management that give me the opportunity to work with various stakeholders such as the government, corporates, manufacturers, NGOs, and most importantly, the informal markets, to create awareness and intervention through stakeholder and community engagement, focusing on scaling waste recovery and waste reduction again. And through this experience visiting multiple textile manufacturers, that sparked my interest in textile industry. I started reading about the impact behind the growth of the global consumption and fast fashion. Since then, I've been working to collect data within the textile industry with hope to bring clarity and transparency to stakeholders on what happens when we donate a piece of clothing and the various possible scalable interventions. This scope fits right into my passion of using data to facilitate acceleration toward textile circularity.
Thank you for that great introduction. Can you tell me what the key findings were from this research in Guatemala?
There are 6 points I would like to highlight. The first point is that Guatemala has a population of 17.6 million people. The economy is characterized by high level of informality, with 71.1% of the population are employed through the informal market. In 2023, according to the World Bank, it was estimated that 55% of the population lived in poverty, with multi-dimensional poverty affecting 61.1% of the population. Multi-dimensional poverty refers to a situation where people are deprived in several key areas in life, such as education, health, living standard, and access to basic service, not just income. The constrained household budgets and limited capacity for discretionary spending contribute to sustained demand for affordable cost clothing, reinforcing the contributed strength of secondhand clothing market. The second point is that Guatemala imports a total of 131.25 million kilograms of used textile in 2023. United States is the main supplier with 98.1% to 99.1% of the market share. Given the high level of market concentration and analysis of the quality and waste within Guatemala's secondhand clothing sector is a large indicator of the characteristics of U.S. export under HS Code 6309. The third is that when we examine the four markets in Guatemala City, the waste accounts for between 9.2% and 11.8% of the total value, dropping to 5% when clothing are imported as fine sorted items. So when you look at ropa cruda, which is often referred to credential or original, and that means that it's unsorted when it enters Guatemala, 88% has an economic value and utility. The fourth is that we also learned that an integrated sorter, Magapaca, that has a retail chain, they also have set up their internal recycling facility, which they further utilize the remaining items, and they're able to reduce their waste percentage to 3.27%. The fifth is that when we are talking about global policy debate on regulating the textile industry, specifically secondhand clothing, it must reflect to the local realities of the receiving countries and the exporting countries. Trying to impose a one-size-fits-all solution, especially from upstream countries, risks disrupting vital value chain and exacerbating inequalities in countries such as Guatemala. What we found in Guatemala is very different than many other markets I work in, such as Tanzania and Uganda. And finally, the last point is that secondhand clothing sector is a powerful driver for inclusive economic opportunity and sustaining livelihoods. It supports an expansive informal economy of micro retailers and vendors where formal employment is often scarce, especially for women.
This is very interesting, especially what you said about livelihoods. It echoes our 2023 findings, which showed that the secondhand clothing sector in Guatemala support jobs. Looking at the result from your research, was there anything that surprised you?
There was actually. So this is the most interesting part for me doing my research when looking at the data, is that the sector has an important role in advancing economic inclusion for women, as mentioned. Of the 282 respondents in the four markets, 60.7% were female and 39.9% were male, outperforming the national data in Guatemala of only 40% of the women are employed compared to 82% of men. Furthermore, out of the 136 business owners, 57.4% were women. Interesting enough, with this data, it also indicates that secondhand clothing has a low barrier to entry, especially with education, and it provides flexible working hours, and it allows lower capital requirements to entry. This is a crucial pathway for entrepreneurship and income generation where formal opportunities are limited for both gender, but especially for women. Offering a lifeline for women who may not have any other opportunities and a pathway for entrepreneurship and financial independence.
Yeah, that's pretty striking. What also stood out for me was how reliant Guatemala is on US imports of secondhand clothing. It underlines how policy decisions taken here in the US can have such a direct impact on the livelihoods of those working in the trade, but also those reliant on used clothing as a source of affordable clothing, which need to be taken into account.
Definitely, Lisa. It is very revealing, actually. So when we take a look at the value of used clothing coming into the country versus the newly manufactured clothing coming in, the new clothing is 4 times more expensive than of secondhand clothing. The pricing indicates to us is that it targets a different consumer segment at different price points, especially targeting different price sensitive consumers. Just remember that in 2023, according to the World Bank, it was estimated that 55% of the population lives in poverty, with multidimensional poverty affecting 61.1% of the population. That means affordability is key. Between 2019 to 2023, United States held a consistent market share between 98 and 99% of the total secondhand import into Guatemala. This means any policy changes upstreams in the United States that would impact the downstream, especially in the design of the collection system, any changes in the donor habits, and exporting policy in the US can have a ripple effect in shaping the quality, affordability, and usability of secondhand clothing in Guatemala and many other receiving countries. It could impact the consumer that may not have an alternative for affordable clothing.
Could you talk us through the value chain that you mapped out as a part of your research? I think that would be helpful to understand the journey of these clothes.
Yeah, so the value chain in Guatemala is very different to other markets I have gone to, in Uganda and in Tanzania. The secondhand clothing value chain in Guatemala, typically the importers import two categories of clothing. The first type is known as ropa cruda, which is known as mentioned earlier, credential in the United States or original in Europe, which means it is untouched clothing. The second type of clothing is known as clasificado, meaning clothing has gone through a sorting facility where quality and category has been sorted. Typically, importers, some have sorting facility, retail chain, and also they may have a wholesale distribution process where they can sell to the informal market. Other ones just distribute directly to the informal markets as it is. The original or ropa cruda, when it enters both formal and informal channels, both are sorted according to the quality and the pricing to their customer demand, allowing retailers to maximize value based on the local price demand. Both channels employs various discount strategies to move inventory and to target different price-sensitive buyers, providing affordable option where new clothing are out of reach. And the remaining residual from the retail process is what we call in the United States as retail pull, or in this case, we call it secondhand retail pull. It is often then bundled together and sold to another retailers. And this is known as saldos, which is often sold to the informal markets. According to our survey across the 4 markets, those who buy saldos still are able to extract 88.5% of it for reuse. And so this is quite interesting. And as for the clasificados, which means sorted clothing that are sorted before it's exported to Guatemala, the upside of the bale is that it has less items that do not have an offtake market. Typically, it is more expensive. The downside for both sorters and retailers is that it's more expensive. And they prefer ropa cruda because of affordability, and they're able to extract more value of the clothing and able to generate more profit and create local jobs.
Yeah, there's also some very interesting gender relating statistics in the report. Could you explain what you found and the significance?
And so, as mentioned before, there is a high percentage of women working in the trade in Guatemala compared to the national economy more broadly. And this is particularly interesting is that all respondents we surveyed, 46% said that they were the primary earners of their household. This was common among married traders with over 50% saying yes. And out of all of the widow, they all responded yes. So we're looking at a significant percentage of women who are being given economic opportunities, but also have households dependent on them. This is an indicator that the trade could be a source of financial independence and stability for families.
Do you think these findings challenge any existing assumptions about the secondhand clothing trades?
That's a great question. Absolutely. So our study approach and methodology focus on following the waste hierarchy and understanding the economics and socioeconomics impact of the used clothing. The study shows the multi-dimension of the trade, highlighting each value chain layer is able to further value extract with end waste of 9.2% to 11.8% of the total value. This is very different than the narrative that textile is being dumped in the receiving countries. Interesting enough, the one companies mentioned before is that they're able to demonstrate that they are able to further value extract by repurposing the textile, downcycling it, and turning them into mattresses, insulations, picnic mats, and other durable goods such as dog beds. These findings are particularly interesting. It demonstrates intricacy of the supply chain through granular data. So Lisa, I know I've been talking for a while, and I wanted to turn this back to you for a minute. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So Garson and Shaw commissioned this research. Why do you think this research matters now?
It feels very timely because of the growing momentum around textile regulations like extended producer responsibility and quality standards that are set. The research clearly shows that the socio-economic realities of recipient countries must be taken into account, especially in places like Guatemala. We at Garson and Shaw recognize the importance of the relationship between the global north and the global south, especially when it comes to the flow of textiles. We in the global north have responsibility to be a part of the end-of-life solution in importing countries. That means supporting fair, practical, and inclusive approaches to textile circularity that works for importing countries. How do your findings relate to the policy debates about the extended producer responsibility schemes and the sustainable textile models?
This is a tricky part, right? Because while efforts to improve transparency and environmental outcome in exporting countries are welcomed, we must caution against unintended consequences or burden for export or receiving markets through technical barrier. We cannot adopt one-size-fits-all policy approaches. As mentioned earlier, the market in Guatemala is very different than El Salvador, very different than Kenya, very different than Uganda and Tanzania. So further policy needs to support both environmental objectives and inclusive trade through granular data. For example, EPR framework needs to be globally inclusive and truly acknowledge the transboundary nature of secondhand clothing industry. Further, data analysis needs to be done on the mechanism and the economic impact at each layer of the supply chain. It is very important to map out the existing infrastructure and the economic feasibility of the various interventions. It's important to know that policy changes such as mandates for pre-sorting or fine sorting for export could have an unintentionally push the cost downstream. This can undermine local value chain and reduce employment opportunity, such as in sorting, logistics, and many other in countries such as Guatemala.
From your experience of doing the research on the ground, what did you see in terms of opportunities being created by businesses locally in Guatemala?
So this is particularly exciting for me as I work within the informal markets and the formal markets previously. So the first one is actually formalizing the trade, even though it is largely informal. These opportunities are available in sorting facility, logistics, retail shops, and downstream recycling. For example, Megapaca and multiple other sorters we spoke to, they set a minimum education level at primary level. They ensure job accessibility to a broader segment of population, formalizing employment and offering structured career path and training. This is especially crucial in Guatemala when many people have limited formal education and job availability in both urban and rural setting. And the second part relates back to intervention. As it's shown that Megapaca has set up a downcycling facility that's able not only to process their remainings from their sorting process, they're also able to process pre-consumer offcuts from textile factories. Their operation demonstrates an example of how textile waste can turn into other valuable goods, such as insulation, mattresses, and other products, that there are interventions that could work. So that's quite exciting.
It is, and thank you for sharing that. And that's why I think the research was so necessary. We need to bring to light all the solutions and innovations being created in Guatemala that no one hears about. So what are the key recommendations coming out of this report?
Well, Lisa, there are many recommendations that I have, but I'll only highlight a few. But I do recommend everyone to go read the report. But the first one is that to support both domestic circularity and responsible export in the United States, public education effort must be encouraged, donation instead of throwing usable clothing into the waste bin. However, with the items that are moldy, wet, or soil should not be thrown into the donation bin, so remove those. The second is that it is important that local collection regulations are harmonized within the United States to make collection easy and as efficient as possible. The third is that we propose making EPR investment reflecting global value chain dynamics so that the fee can support reuse and especially for international reuse and end-of-life solutions. The fourth one is that there is a value, and we must acknowledge that this value is that local sorting in the importing countries are very important, and avoiding mandate for pre-sorting for export. The fifth one is that further research needs to be done to map out the infrastructure and the needs to be able to have targeted intervention in order to tackle textile waste. It is important that general waste infrastructure in Guatemala is strengthened. As highlighted is that the overall waste collection coverage is 55%. It is also important to acknowledge that textile waste is a small percentage and that government needs to prioritize waste containment, set up waste recovery facility before specializing in textile intervention. There are several other recommendations I mentioned earlier, but I encourage everyone to go read them in the report. And so, Lisa, are you ready for another question?
I'm ready.
Okay, so what do you hope this research will ultimately change or inform?
Well, my greatest hope is that this report clearly highlights that the secondhand clothing trade is not a problem to be solved, but a core part of the circular textile economy. I hope it leads to policies that both environmentally sound and socially just for everyone who works in this complex and inclusive value chain. And for you, what are the one key takeaway you hope your audience will remember from this report?
As I only get one takeaway to share, I hope the policymakers will recognize the intricacy of the secondhand clothing supply chain and use granular data to help them bring more clarity before introducing technical barrier to trade or other restrictive practices. Because however well-intentioned this may be, it could genuinely disrupt established value chain. It may exacerbate inequalities for the receiving countries.
Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing your insights. This research really demonstrates how deeply the value chain is interconnected and the potential consequences of misinformed policy decisions.
And thank you so much, Lisa, for this great opportunity to discuss this with you. And getting the policy right impacts the livelihoods and the global drive towards circularity.
That's very well said. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to everybody for watching. Please do read the report and also take a look at our past reports. They are all available on garsonshore.com.